Understanding decision logic means being able to easily identify how a specific decision outcome is being reached when the rules and models that are part of the decision execute. Obviously, you can't understand your decision in the absence of data. Data is front and center in Sparkling Logic Smarts. Data is used during development so you can execute the decision at any time as you write rules. This helps you find errors faster and reduces development time. During testing, you can easily identify and address failed test cases, and you can execute simulations to perform impact analysis and strategy comparisons so you can determine the optimal decision to deploy. When you are developing and testing your decision, it's important to be able to easily determine and answer questions such as which rules are applied to this transaction, how frequently is a specific rule executing against a data sample, how did the decision reach a specific conclusion? For example, why was this applicant rejected? The Smarts environment was designed to make it easy to answer these kinds of questions and to visually explore and understand how your rules execute against data. Let's see this in action. In Smarts, I have three main panes that give me information. On the left, I have the document pane. This shows the documents in the data sample I'm currently working with. In this data sample, I have 100 documents. I'm able to scroll through, and you can see as I scroll through the data changes and look at any of those documents, or I can jump to any individual document in the data sample. In the lower right pane, I have the decision pane. Here I can see my decision flow, and on the decision tab, I can see all of the decision steps and the rule sets or models within them. And then the top pane is the dashboard pane, where I have graphical reports based on the KPIs and metrics that I've defined on this decision. Let's look at the document pane. You'll notice that some of the fields in the document pane are highlighted. The highlighting tells me which fields are used by rules. If I put my cursor on the highlighting, I can see that this field is used in 2 conditions. The age field is used in 3 conditions. The fields highlighted in orange are inputs to my decision. If I look at my decision outcome section, fields highlighted in blue are outputs from the decision, and those fields that are highlighted in orange and blue are those intermediate values that are computed by rules and used in other rules as inputs. The length of the shading gives me a visual indication of how frequently a field is referenced by my rules. So for example, with risk indicator, I can see that 17 actions reference this field. In Smarts, I'm able to immediately filter to all of the fields that are used by my rules. Now when I look at the document, I can see all of the fields that are referenced somewhere in my rules. Now let's look at the decision pane to see what kind of information we get from the UI. I'll start with the decision flow. The decision flow organizes this decision into a series of activities. Each activity is associated with a decision step that can invoke rule sets or models. I look at the first activity and I can see that I start with 100 documents. This matches the fact that I have 100 documents in my data sample. On the next step, the eligibility step, I can see that all 100 went to the eligibility step, and out of the eligibility step we had 1 applicant that was rejected, 21 that were referred, and 78 that went on to the tiering assessment. At the end of the processing, 78 were accepted and quoted. This, by the way, matches my report in my dashboard, where I can see that 78 of my applicants were approved, 21 were referred, and 1 was denied. If I look at the decision itself, for each one of the rules that executed, the indicator is green. This means that this rule executed on document number 1, the current document that I'm looking at in my data sample. If I want to, I can filter to only the rules that apply to a given document. So I can filter to only the rules that fired on document number 1. And here I can see all of the rules that were applied in this particular case. In addition to the rule execution indicator, I have a heat map or shading that shows me how many times the rule executed across the data sample. So I can see, for example, in this first case, that the rule executed 38 times out of my 100 cases in my data sample. I'm able to click on that shading and filter on those cases where the rule was applied. So I can see in my first out of the 38 cases, in this case, if I look at my decision outcome, the applicant was assessed as standard risk, and that will be the case for each one. As I scroll through, here's the second of the 38, also standard risk. So using SMARTS, I'm able to immediately filter to all of those cases where a given rule applied, so I can manually look at those cases. Let's look at the dashboard pane, where I also have an execution trace that gives me the same information I have in my decision pane when I filtered to only the rules that have applied to a specific document. So I can see the trace in this execution trace pane that shows me on the current document, this is the path of the evaluation, and I can see where each one of the rules was evaluated and executed. And I see that the standard risk age-based rule, the action was actually executed, and that matches what I see in the pane below. In my tiering based on driver's history and score, I have one rule that was applied, the one accidents rule, and this matches what I see in my filtered decision pane below. So in addition to filtering to only the rules that executed on a given case, I'm also able to look at my execution trace and have a summary of my execution on my current document. Now let's clear our filters. And if I look at the execution trace for the document group, I can see how the documents went through the path of execution and which rules executed in each case. And this matches more what I have in my decision flow, where I can see that I have 78 documents that went to this tier assessment step, and that matches what I see in my trace above. So I've got various ways of looking at and summarizing information in SMARTS to make it obvious how the rules are interacting with my data. So the last feature I'm going to show you is called the investigation pane. The investigation pane gives me a graph, let me expand the pane, of the entire execution and the relationships between my rules and my data. Let me filter this graph so we can look at only my eligibility rules. So when I filter to only my eligibility rules, I have a much smaller graph that is much easier for me to comprehend. I can see which rules executed and which data elements were accessed as part of that execution. So in summary, SMARTS has a powerful UI designed to improve productivity and reduce development time, as well as streamline testing. This enables you to have more confidence that your deployments are accurate and meet your requirements.